We're very excited to do the next series for the Tuberville speakers, and we're very honored to have Dr. Segrin joining us today. He's from the Department of Communications here at U of A. He's been at U of A since 1998. His background is in communications, but also psychology. He's one of our affiliated faculty in family studies, so students, good opportunity for you to learn more about his research. He's another great person. Melissa raves about him all the time. So he's a great person to consider for committees or even just to go pick his brain. Today he's going to talk to us about this idea that's called helicopter parenting. And so often we think about, we focus so much on not parenting enough, but this is the other end of the spectrum of parenting too much and trying to understand that. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining me today. If you're here from out of town, it's one of the best universities in the world. I think so, at least. But hopefully you'll come to that same conclusion yourself. And maybe I can help to move you a little closer to that. I'd like to talk today about overparenting. This is colloquially known as helicopter parenting. You've probably heard a lot about it in the media. Talk about causes and consequence. What I'd like to do today is cover three basic things. First, introduce the concept, explain what it is, particularly from a behavioral science point of view rather than sort of a media point of view. Talk about some historic trends in the development of overparenting theorizing. Some of this is the papers and ideas that influenced me as well as my own ideas. Because this research is pretty much in its infancy, some of this is wild speculation. So save the recording. 10 years from now, you might be playing this on the Discovery Channel or on the Comedy Channel. I don't know. But we'll find out. And finally, I will talk to you about some of the research findings that we've collected so far in the last 4 or 5 years on overparenting. Of course, I have many people I've been working with through the years. I'd like to just acknowledge them. These are some of the people who are either current or former graduate students or just colleagues at other schools, who really, I have to give these people credit in this case, particularly my former graduate student, Michelle Gevertz, really kind of brought me into this line of research. We did our first parenting study at her urging probably 5 or 6 years ago, and she's been a great person to work with, as have some of these other people, some of these people you might know from your classes and whatnot. They've been very helpful in this line of research. What the media calls helicopter parenting is something that was first referenced, I believe, by Klein and Fay in 1990. They wrote a book called Parenting with Love and Logic. The book is now in its second edition. And what's quite unusual about it is the second edition just came out a few years ago. It's very unusual to see a book where the first and second edition are separated by like 16, 17 years, but 20 years, in this, more than that in this case. But I believe Klein and Fay were probably the first to kind of come up with this term in this really well-selling book, although it wasn't necessarily a social scientific work. They talked about parents who hover over their children and parents who are ready to swoop down and solve the problems of their children. And this has largely been lamented in the press as a problem, that these over-involved parents are obnoxious. They get under the skin of high school teachers and college professors and school administrators and even employers. The evidence that's been brought to bear early on in the discussion of helicopter parenting or overparenting has been largely anecdotal. So you hear stories of parents who get involved in the job interview of their children who are graduating from college, or parents who call up the teachers of their children and negotiate grades, parents who get involved in their children's dating life, saying you shouldn't be dating this person or you should be dating that person. And really, since Klein and Fay's book, probably 15 to 20 years of the discussion of helicopter parenting, it struck me, was largely just anecdotal. You couldn't find it in the scientific journals. It was in the newspapers and the magazines. That's what you heard about helicopter parenting. So, the media reports in the 90s really sort of introduced this concept. And scientifically, it's been studied under the headings of things like out-of-control parenting or over-parenting is what we call it. I'll get into that in a moment. I want to show you a brief video clip from the media full of anecdotal evidence. Nevertheless, it's an interesting illustration of what helicopter parenting looks like.
It's a new school year, and that means college kids are about to learn a big lesson from their techno-savvy parents. You can run, but you can't hide.
Dad, cool it with the Twitter updates, okay? I'm sitting on the patio. I know you're sitting.
As these Verizon ads spoof, media mad moms and dads are texting, tweeting, even friending their college freshmen on Facebook, eager to stay close to their kids long after the mini-dad has pulled away from the dorm. Those who felt the power of parental omnipresence include Ethan Lewis and his brother Brendan.
Hello?
Hi. How was poli sci this morning?
Mom?
Hey. I just got your email. Hello, Bren.
Hey.
How did the human geography series go? Hi, Ethan.
What's going on?
You going to class on Thursday at 1 o'clock?
Hello?
Hey.
Hello?
Are you having trouble with the phone?
No, I had it in vibrate.
You should take it off vibrate unless you're in class, so you hear me.
Robin Lewis is a single parent who homeschooled her sons. And just because Ethan and Brendan are out of the house, and she's taken on a full-time job, that doesn't mean she's losing interest or hour-by-hour involvement in her boys' lives every single day, like this one.
Hi, Ethan. It's Mom. It's 9:10, and I know you have class at 9:30.
Later, she makes another call to Ethan.
Hi. Hi, Ethan.
What's going on?
I'm good. How you doing? Just get out of class?
She checks an email from Brendan,
History quiz is going to be on the first 13 chapters.
sends an email to Ethan with his fall schedule.
105.
Another call to Ethan.
What are you doing this afternoon?
I have to meet some people at 5.
Socially?
Oh, no, study.
Oh, study group?
Study group, yeah.
Then she calls Brendan.
Are you going to be able to get that map thing for me?
Yeah, I'm going to do that today. Like, I have a few things, so.
Well, why don't you call me after human geography and let me know how to class plan?
Alright, we'll do.
American Lit class, because it goes to 3 to register.
When she's not talking to her boys,
And you're doing so much.
Robin's organizing their lives. She spends an hour drafting to-do emails for her sons,
You did so well.
checking their grades,
98 out of 100 on this history essay.
checking their bank accounts,
And it looks like Brendan's going to need a few dollars for the weekend.
even using their personal passwords to check their student email.
Something about a conference reminder.
Her tools of the trade include this stuffed purple folder.
I make notes that he's going to be graded on 10 quizzes, a book review, 1 exam, midterm final, and I even check off each week as we go.
Even a dedicated cell phone just for the boys' calls.
And this is the hotline. One of the boys calls me at 10:20, and I can say to them, wait a minute, you can't be calling me now. You're supposed to be in history class. And then they'll go, oops.
Robin works tirelessly to keep those oops to a minimum. She proofreads her son's papers at lunch. And Brendan and Ethan both say they're grateful for their mom's efforts on their behalf.
She wants to make sure that I do it well, and it's all because, she cares. Which is great, because, then it's like, I don't have to make a list, and I can just print it out. That's it. So it saves me a lot of time. It's nice to have someone else that's kind of serves as, and maybe secretary mom.
One of your sons, I think, referred to you as like a secretary mom.
Well, I think that's great. It means that
Up here.
To harness the internet, some campuses have even added Hi Mom cameras, where parents can hover from thousands of miles away. Robin Lewis says she doesn't hover, she helps. She even drives 2 hours to Ethan's dorm, and twice a month does his laundry.
did you check all the pockets? Make sure nothing's in the pockets.
She shops for his groceries.
Wow. Looks like I have a lot of cleaning to do.
Picks up his dorm room. She even does the dishes.
Isn't it time for him to say, yeah, I don't like it like this, I'll clean it up? Or to live that?
And he'll tell me that. He'll tell me that. I think that's probably more coming from me, that I just want to tidy up. We don't need any green tea.
Robin.
Okay, so you see here an example of what overparenting looks like in action. And by the way, you want to tell us what campus that was on?
Arizona State University.
Arizona State University. Melina informed me of this when we were having family con the last fall. That I never realized that was actually ASU was the campus. So, close to home. This mother was providing developmentally inappropriate experiences for her children. In other words, things that they could have done for themselves, she was doing for them. And our question is, what is the effect of experiencing this? What happens when you see overparenting delivered to children? And then we'll talk about as well, what are some of the factors that drive parents to do this? So before I get to that, I want to talk about some historical trends and developments in the theorizing of overparenting, and talk a little bit more about some background issues into how and why this happens. So as we said, this is developmentally inappropriate parenting. It's more than what is needed for a child at that stage of development. What's going on is there's a failure to allow for the development of autonomy. Those young men could have clearly done their own laundry, done their own dishes, right? But instead, like the sponge that soaks up the water, they sort of soaked in the efforts of their mother and kind of enjoyed it. Who wouldn't, of course? Another hallmark feature of overparenting that you saw in the video was excessive involvement, the mother being overly involved in the children's lives, using their personal email. Well, people who engage in overparenting will often assume responsibility for the happiness of the child, so that if the child is unhappy, I as the parent need to do something to fix that. I need to see them happy. It's my responsibility. It's not their responsibility to be happy. It's mine to get them happy. And what often happens in overparenting is a projection of parental goals and ideals onto the child, so that the parent is actually living vicariously in many ways through the child. The child's success then becomes construed in the parent's terms. If I want to be an attorney, probably am not one now, but you're going to go be an attorney, that would make me feel good. Okay, so I'm going to take my goals and project them onto the child in some ways. A lot of times we feel that overparenting is a phenomenon that's very prevalent in meshed family systems, where parent and child emotional connections are probably too close, and certainly parent and child's goals get commingled to the extent. And that's what happens when you simply don't have autonomy. Children developing as teenagers and starting to become autonomous from their parents, developing and pursuing their own goals and ideals. Instead, they all get commingled with the parents, and that is a formula that's ripe for overparenting in meshed family system. One of the paradoxes of overparenting, at least initially we believed, it was enacted with the best of intentions. That while some of you may have been trying to control your gag reflex by watching that video, you probably have to admit she was trying to do nice things for those children, right? To pick up for them, put money in your account. I mean, who can fault that mother for her benevolence toward her children? The problem with it is that the outcomes that we're seeing in the literature, and as well as our own lab, coming from our own lab, suggest that despite all those good intentions, overparenting does not have good outcomes associated with it. And that's one of the great paradoxes of helicopter parenting or overparenting. That we feel that parents are often approaching it trying to do what they think is best for their kids, but in effect are setting their kids up for failure. Components of overparenting that we study at our lab involve anticipatory problem solving. Anticipatory problem solving, which is trying to look out ahead of where the child's at and see what the problem might be and then do something to correct it, so the child never has to deal with the problem. In that video, there was a little clip, oh, the weekend is coming up. He's going to need some more money for the weekend. That would be anticipatory problem solving. Let's back up a second. We talked before about taking responsibility for the child's emotional well-being. So if the child is sad, the child is frustrated, the child is angry, the parent feels it's my job to step in and do something. heavy advice giving. You should, telling the child what to do, directing the child, again, often through the lens of what the parent would like for him or herself. Heavy offers of tangible assistance, I'll do your laundry, I'll do your cooking, etc. And risk aversion, that desire to sort of take your kids and wrap them in bubble wrap, right, until they're 30 years old so that they never get a scratch. Now, risk aversion could be risk to physical injury as well as psychological harm. That's the package deal of overparenting. The important thing to remember in overparenting is the over part of it. Many of the things you see up here are part of normal, functional, happy, healthy parenting. It's the over part and the developmentally inappropriate part that separates overparenting from functional and healthy parenting. Before I progress further, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what overparenting isn't. Because in the media, other types of parenting get flung around, and invariably, whatever the last story was in USA Today or CNN, someone has a question, isn't this just the same thing as that? So let me rule out some alternatives. Overparenting is not little emperor parenting. That's indulgent parenting. Overparenting is not tiger parenting. That's demands for success. That was really hot about a year ago when some book came out and the author did the book tour on all the TV shows. And at that time, everybody thought, well, isn't that just the same thing? It's not helicopter parenting or overparenting. Overparenting is not anxious parenting. Social scientists have studied anxious parenting extensively. Nervousness, that's different. And overparenting is not intrusive parenting. Parents who use heavy psychological control. Do these alternative forms of parenting, at least two of which are largely elements of the popular press, and that's about it. The other two truly are socially scientifically investigated. They have nothing to do with overparenting? Of course not. There's elements of that. But overparenting, as I just showed it to you, is very distinct from these three. And again, what you see in parentheses is largely what I think parenting scholars would cook those types of parenting down to. Are there elements of psychological control in overparenting? Sure. Is there some nervousness in overparenting? Absolutely. Why not? Some demands for success? Perhaps. Overindulgence? Certainly. But these are different phenomena. Overparenting is a much more encompassing. It has elements of all these plus additional ones that we'll talk about now. I want to take you back in time to the self-esteem movement. If you're over 40 or 50 years old, you probably remember this time. If you go back to the 1980s, somehow our society got sold on a bill of goods that went something like this. The problem with kids who are in games and taking crack and all the new things that were sort of problems in society is they all have low self-esteem. I don't know where this idea came from, but it spread like wildfire in the 80s. People were talking self-esteem, self-esteem, self-esteem. We need to boost kids' self-esteem. That'll be the solution to all ills. You're all winners. That was the beginning of that movement. And so you get the trophy just for showing up, that kind of thing. You're all special. That was a big message we delivered to our young people. We started linking happiness and perfectionism. Everything had to be great. Everything had to be perfect. This was the time the yuppies were really emerging in American society. And there was a big emphasis on perfection and success and status and achievement. And what happens is you're seeing with that movement a generation of people who have low tolerance for frustration because they're looking for perfection. They're used to being told they're perfect, they're great, they're special. And this is the net result of that. Also, narcissism. I will not get into the controversy about this, but there's some pretty good scientific evidence from trend studies that narcissism as a personality trait is on the rise in young people, going back from the 1970s up till today. And some people attribute this in part to the self-esteem movement. In the midst of all of this, my advisor in psychology, Lynn Abramson, her advisor, Marty Seligman, then president of APA, was the traffic cop who said stop in the late 80s. And he came up with a paper where he talked about baseless self-esteem. And Marty said, the problem isn't that these kids lack self-esteem. It's in fact quite the opposite. They have baseless self-esteem. Okay? They're easily offended, easily angered, crushed by even the faintest criticism, and they think that they're too special. And he actually was talking specifically about kids in gangs and inner cities who at the time would say, you can't come down this road, this is my neighborhood, and they'd pull a gun on the guy. And Marty would say, who do these 14-year-olds think they are that they own this neighborhood? That's not element of low self-esteem. They think they're the king of the neighborhood. That's high self-esteem. But what is it based on? Is it based on scholastic achievement, something like that? Oh, it's based on the fact that they're carrying a gun. So that to me, even I was a graduate student at the time, and even though I wasn't studying parenting at the time, I thought, wow, this is a real shift from this voice that we've been hearing for the last 10 years about kids having low self-esteem. Now we have the head of the American Psychological Association, the then president, saying maybe the problem is the exact opposite. Question for you. Are these today's helicopter parents? When are parents of today, parents of the 2010s, early 2000s, when were they born? Not long before or after that movement. And so when you study helicopter parenting or overparenting, you have to think about when were these people reared? What were their parental models like? Very likely they got a good dose of this. It's speculation, but I think it's the beginning of it. Munich and Munich wrote a paper in 2009, and I have to actually attribute the word overparenting to them. They're neo-psychodynamic researchers, but they came up with some very interesting observations about overparenting. One of them being that there's an exaggeration of a normal narcissistic identification with a child. It's very common for parents to see themselves in their child for completely obvious reasons. Just like the term over-parenting, that idea, that identification can be overdone. And they clearly felt that was a component of that, which I would agree with. Talked also about self-esteem in their paper, being dependent on the child's success. So the parent almost sees whatever I am in life as a success or failure is a function of what my child does, if they're successful or failure. So it's an over-identification and definition of success based upon what the child does. Difficulties with separation, I'm sure that's fairly evident. Compromising between nurturance and aggression. I'm going to show you some data in a moment that suggests that maybe overparenting is not just all enacted with good intentions. There might be something sinister underneath all of it, and that's where the aggression part might be coming in. And an effort to solve damage to the parent's sense of self. These guys had no data at all. They're clinicians. We did a study on parental regret that I want to show you about, where I think, here again, there's some issues going on with these parents, where the things that they realize they will never be, they can now pursue for their child. And the vigorous pursuit of that is part of what motivates overparenting. Here's a book I highly recommend if you're interested in this topic, done by the sociologist Margaret Nelson. Nelson did a qualitative study in which she interviewed parents and young adults, not a huge sample, but had a lot of depth, and made some really interesting observations that, for me at least, were quite influential. She defines parenting out of control, or out of control parenting, as beginning with this heavy contact between parent and child, the intimacy plus surveillance formula. The little video clip, did you see the little reference to the parenting camera with the college campuses would put cameras all over, and then parents could access them through the internet and zoom them in to see if they could spot their children? Or just the whole cell phone idea, right? Where the parent had a special phone for her kids. Remember Batman? Batman had that red hotline phone that he kept in like a donut container just for the important calls, okay? Well, that's kind of what overparentings do. They have that heavy dose of surveillance with their children, plus a lot of intimacy. Nelson says that overparenting, she's a sociologist, if you think about it, she's very prone to see class issues, but says that overparenting is largely a professional middle-class phenomenon, that you don't see it a lot in the lower socioeconomic strata. And so college campuses actually end up being great places to study. Another hallmark of overparenting, or parenting out of control as she calls it, is this lengthy period of child dependence. Back in the day, you know, the Eisenhower administration, it's very common for people to leave their family of origin as early as 18, you know, and get married and start their own life and have their kids. And of course, we all know today that not only do children stay at home longer, well into their 20s, but now we have what we call like the boomerang kids, right? Which is they actually leave the home and then come back into the home. And sometimes boomerang kids will be in the family of origin into their 30s, literally. And that's not something that used to be as prevalent in the 50s and 60s, certainly. And the boomerang kids also illustrate this second point of no clear launching point. Back in the day when people would graduate from high school and get married, they'd move on. Today, it's like, well, when are they going to go? They go to college, then they come back in at home, they get a job, they lose the job, then they come back home again. And parents are in this sort of, I don't know when they're leaving. And the over-parenting, or the helicopter parenting, they're completely happy with that situation. But people who are not helicopter parents are not too happy with that situation. They try to protect kids from pains and sacrifices that they themselves probably had to make. I had to work really hard in life. I don't want you to have to do it, that idea. They're trying to clear the path for the kids. And she finds a lot of anxiety in helicopter parents or parenting out of control. And the punchline of this book is this idea. And this is where I'm going to talk about regret momentarily. It's inspired by research on regret. Nostalgia for what might have been becomes the guide for what should be. So this is the confusion of parental ideals and goals being projected onto the child. So if you watch these shows on TV, these like girl beauty contests, where there's some mom backstage who's sort of pushing the daughter on. And the daughter's like 4 or 5 years old. I ask my students, who do you think really wants to be the beauty queen? Do you think the 4-year-old even grasps what it means to be a beauty queen? I don't have any doubt that that mother knows full well what beauty queen is and probably wishes she would have been one. And now realizes the opportunity for that is gone. So the chances are now, if I'm going to get my hands on a beauty queen ideal, I'm going to do it through my child. Okay? And that's the idea of over-parenting or helicopter parenting in a nutshell. Okay, so at this time, let me just sort of signpost here for a second. I want to show you some data that we've collected here at U of A on our research findings on overparenting. And I think you'll see some of these ideas we just talked about illustrated in some of these research findings. And before I get into these, are there any questions? Yeah, because feel free to jump in here anytime.
Just a very quick one. So overparenting is developmentally inappropriate.
Correct.
So does that, I mean, we pick naturally on adolescence as a period, but how early do you think goes this?
Great question. I mean, all of the research to date is really young adults. There certainly is a point at which parents ought to create space for the autonomy of their children to develop. And if you kind of don't make enough space for a 4-year-old to develop their autonomy, I don't think that's going to be a big deal. But if it's going into like 18, 19, 20, that's where I think some of these personality manifestations really come around. So the bottom line is we don't know the answer to that question, but my hypothesis is that this is a much more extreme phenomenon in terms of the consequences it produces when it's done in late adolescence as opposed to early childhood. There is a point in the development of a child in which, again, a parent should start to gradually back off. A good example would be feeding the child, But if a parent feeds a child for an extra 6 months, I don't see the kind of findings I'm going to show you momentarily coming about, unless maybe they keep doing it for those 10 years. But it seems that when offspring are capable of doing, largely living autonomously, they could be doing their own laundry, groceries, feeding themselves, keeping things clean, and the parents still getting involved and giving them advice, assistance, etc., that are probably beyond what they need, and that's preventing them from developing an autonomous self and a sense of coping skills and problem solving of their own. That's when the trouble comes in. So we can only speculate now that it's probably in late adolescence, but probably if it starts early and continues on, you could see some of these effects. Great question. Other questions? Okay. So in this study, we were looking at some of the traits that occur in young adults who've been exposed to overparenting. And I want to just say something briefly, that we study overparenting, I know this sounds strange, by asking parents to give us information. I can't tell you how many times I review manuscripts where people want to study helicopter parenting. In fact, every other one that's ever been published, to my knowledge, uses child reports of helicopter parenting. I was reviewing a manuscript for Journal of Child Family Studies just last night, and the author went on at great length about how child reports of parenting are more valid than parent reports of parenting. That's news to me. it seems to me if you want to study parenting, it's not a bad idea to ask parents what they do. And I'm hopeful that the field will latch on to that. I think child reports of parenting are very important, and you can learn an awful lot from them. But I want to show you what some of the perils of those are, namely common method variance, right? If you ask me to report on something my parents did and then something I feel, and you find that they're correlated, is that a shock to anybody in this room? That's common method variance. What I try to do is show that what the parents say they did as parents predicts something that's going on with the child. Now, to me, that's a more powerful demonstration of overparenting. If you can't get your hands on parents, then the best you can do then ask the child about the parenting. But I really believe that in parenting research, and this is not a new idea, Diana Monroe, it goes back to the 60s, so that if you want to study parenting, it's a great idea to get parents involved in the research. So when you see a variable like overparenting, that's coming from the parent. This particular study, we had 538 parent-child dyads from around the country. And what we did is find that there was less open and more problematic parent-child communication as reported by both the parent and the child. So both the parents, the helicopter parents if you want to call them that, and the children said that the communication in the family was more problematic. There were more difficulties, more misunderstandings, more conflicts, etc. There was also an indirect effect on lower family satisfaction, as reported by the child. Now think about that. I would have thought, well, if my mom would have came to my dorm room and scrubbed the refrigerator and cleaned the stove and stocked me up with groceries, I'd like that. But it seems actually, we learned early on that not all is well in these family systems. These young adults were actually reporting lower family satisfaction through, in this case, the indirect effect through this more problematic parent-child communication. It was an eye-opener for us that maybe we should realize this is not necessarily what the child wants. I had to give an anecdotal story real quick. I had an experience where I'm the head of the communication department. I was called by a parent of a student, not my student, but one of my professor's students. And the parent wanted the student to have a higher grade in the class. And the parent went on and on and on. And he was saying things like, now listen to me, I'm 55 years old. I work in the financial sector in New York. I know about negotiations. I'm like, okay. And of course, for the FERPA reasons, I couldn't even talk to him about his child's grade. He called me like 3 or 4 times, and every time he'd say, I'm 55 years old, I work in the financial sector in New York. Okay, now I want to talk to you about my son. I thought, this kid must be crazy. Can you believe this? He's had his dad call me. Knocks on my door one day. He's like, I just want you to know, Professor Segrin, I really want to apologize for my dad. I really wish he wouldn't do it. It's so freaking embarrassing. And this kid just had this sullen look on his face. That was an eye-opening experience for me. I realized, not all of the people who get a dose of overparenting are willing recipients of it. That in this case, it took, and I kind of said, well, what took you so long? Your dad's been calling you the last 2 weeks. He kind of admitted to me, it took me a couple of weeks to get my bravery up to come and talk to you and apologize, because it's so humiliating to me to have my dad do this. I don't want my dad to do this. This is an illustration of this empirically right here. Okay, in this next study, we were looking at also some traits, and I'm sure this will come as a shock to you that we found greater child entitlement from overparenting. So to the extent that the parents said that they engaged in this overparenting, it was predictive of more traits of entitlement in the children, which fits perfectly with Munich's idea of narcissism. In this other study, we had 653 parent-child dyads, and we again replicated the narcissism effect in children. I just have to say, if you're going to have children, and you can send them out into the world with any trait or lack thereof, narcissism would be a good one to get a handle on. Narcissism does not serve people well in life. When they leave the family system, the family of origin, where they can get away with a lot, you go out into the working world, start dating, school, etc. This is a maladaptive personality trait. And unfortunately, it seems to be one of the outcomes of overparenting, and thereby you see that paradoxical effect of perhaps enacted with the best of intentions, but doesn't necessarily have the best outcomes. More avoidant coping. Yes, question on that?
Oh, well, I have a question more broadly.
Okay.
Can you talk at all about the prevalence of overparenting? And I'm interested if overparenting varies as a function of family resources, whether that's sort of like traditional SES or like family social support. Do we know anything about prevalence and how it varies?
No, actually, to be honest with you, because here's the problem. In these studies, even though the samples are large, these are not cross-sectional, nationally representative. I mean, my entree to all these parent-child dyads is U of A, Cal State Chico, University of Kansas, Keene State College. Keene State College serves a very different demographic than what we have. Cal State Chico serves a very different demographic than we have, but they're still universities. I mean, I don't have the people who never even went to college. And so for that reason, it would be wild speculation based on these data to say what it is. Certainly in Nelson has even, she did a qualitative investigation of 25 parent-child dyads. Her argument, though, is that in the lower socioeconomic status dyads, you're much less likely to see this. So to give you like an actual prevalence estimate, 15%, 18%, 20%, I couldn't really do that, but I could say with some confidence that as you move up the socioeconomic ladder, it becomes more prevalent. That we could say. But if this is 10% or if this is 40%, and even with my own data, I mean, I've never tried like cut points. At what point does it get so high that now discriminates between? I haven't even done that yet. I'm too busy to do that. Research for me, I'm not kidding you, it's an evening and weekend endeavor with my life the way it is. So someday I want to go back and mine my data sets. I've got tons of data, but so far I've just been modeling relationships. It's an excellent question. I've thought of that myself, like how many people are really even doing this, And of course I have my anecdotes from being in the department. I get calls from parents as well. But, so it's a great question. And as I said, this research is still very much in its infancy. We just don't really know that yet.
I have a question.
Yes?
Would it still be considered overparenting if you're in a stressful environment and you have to adapt your parenting to protect your child and keep an eye on them more, keep them safe?
No, not at all. I mean, think about, we use the phrase developmentally inappropriate. There's nothing inappropriate about what you're talking about. For our times of stress, if you go back to great family systems researchers, Olson and McCubbin, they said in the FACES model, right, that during certain times, enmeshment actually becomes adaptive. If dad got killed at the lumber mill, and now we have to plan his funeral and figure out where we're going to come up with money, we had better come together and be enmeshed literally at that point in time. Now, eventually we back out. But in response to stress, of course, the family system changes its dynamics, and that's a functional thing to do. It's only when it's being done for reasons that are not functional. Again, perhaps in the video you could surmise that these two, if they're ASU students, could have probably done most of those things themselves. They don't need their mom telling them, hey, you got a quiz tomorrow in political science. That's where it's developmentally inappropriate. So certainly there are people who live in environments where this sort of heavy-handed parenting might be appropriate, or they have an adolescent who's really troublesome. And a smart parent knows, I better keep a close grip on this kid. Absolutely. Yes?
Have you looked at all at relative prevalence based on the composition of the dyads? So are there higher levels when you look at mother-son dyads versus father-daughter?
Good question.
Father-son?
I'll tell you what I do methodologically in all these studies. I haven't looked at that yet either. I need some free time in my life, particularly. I could look at it, it'd be great. I let the student pick which parent they want to be in the study. Well, as I say, please fill out the survey, and then, if you would, have a parent do it. And I don't dictate to them, mom or dad, because I feel like this. I want to study overparenting. They're going to guide me to the overparenting, right? The helicopter parent, the student will be my guide. So if they pick, and who do you think they pick? Like 80% of them pick mom. So my data sets are probably 80% mom, 20% dad. But that's fascinating to think about. What if there's a difference? I haven't even considered modeling mom and dad differences. Someday, I think you're possibly onto something. Why did 80% of them channel me to mom? Yeah. Yes, question.
Well, I was just thinking about your remark about how, well, if it's in an environment that's stressful, then that's actually a functional response.
Right.
Well, these could be moms that are, moms and dads, that are in another environment that require that kind of response, a highly competitive environment. So how is that really, could still be another adaptive response?
My answer to that question, it's a great question. It's in N equals 653. That's why we get big samples. What you're talking about is a potential source of error variance. Someone could be in a highly stressful environment. Maybe they're living in the ghetto and there's bullets flying, there's bad people, and they got to really keep their kids and give them cell phones. But then there's probably the ones who live in Paradise Valley as well, and they got the exact opposite. Those sources of error variance should theoretically cancel each other out. So it's absolutely a good point. There's probably subsets within these data sets of people who are doing things that I am calling overparenting that really aren't. But then there's probably the exact opposite, right? Where, you know what I'm saying, that you have the people in the highly stressful environments and the people in the highly non-stressful environments. And those sources of error variance work against each other in such a way that, you know, you say, what we're doing here in social science in general is we're making generalizations.
I guess
right?
I'm saying the yuppie environment has its own stresses, which is high competition.
It is.
You're investing in one kid, you know, it's basically a hyper K strategy.
Right.
So looking at something like family size or number of offspring.
That psychoevolutionary people would be high-fiving you right now, I'm sure, right? If you have one child, you put all your chips in that basket. But I'm not arguing that that's functional, psychologically for the child. I mean, if the parent says, this is my one and only child, this is my one and only chance to make the next governor of Arizona, I'm going to do everything. I'm not here to judge, but I'm going to say, that's no consolation to that child. And check out some of the findings I'm going to show you momentarily. That the parent may have rational, logical intentions, but I can't seem to find any data that show that's beneficial to the child. I wish I could. I've been searching for it. I'm going to show you a lot momentarily. Yes?
Could you walk us through some of the items for overparenting? Because I think that might help if people, are you asking, like, do these behaviors occur, or are you asking, do these behaviors occur and, you know, and it's annoying to you that your mom is like, or
Right.
like, is there a perception?
Well, first of all, so far, all the measures, I'll get to some in a second,
Just
are from
parents.
from the parent. I'll get to one in a moment where I do it with the child. But the parent ones are all worded in such a way as to get at a behavioral phenomenon and its frequency. So like, how often do you give your child advice or something? Or how often do you think in advance about problems your child might have and try to solve them? Or do you get involved in your child's choice of friendship? Or if your child seems very happy or sad, how much responsibility do you? I get questions that get that responsibility for affective state, stuff like that. I don't get into the it bothers you part at all, actually. And in fact, most of the other helicopter parenting measures that are done from the child's perspective also don't do it. They just get at the objective, does your parent give you lots of money, do your laundry, etc. It's interesting to ask about annoyance. I think some of those family communication problem items actually get into that. I am annoyed with my relationship with my parent and my family. Let me get to the back and I'll get to Matthias. You had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, are there any racial, ethnic differences or cultural?
Yeah, this is a real white phenomenon. There's no doubt about it. Not to say it doesn't occur in other groups, but if you had to go into the prevalence, it's way more prevalent in white, middle, upper class, absolutely. Matthias.
So you take items that are by definition or by developmental stage inappropriate. So the development inappropriate comes in the item.
That's right.
If you endorse that when the child is 18,
right.
Then it ought to be.
And that's why I would never use my measure of overparenting for a parent of a 13-year-old. Because those same items, if applied to a 13-year-old, would be completely appropriate. So we developed our measure with knowledge that we would be using with young adults, as have really all the other helicopter researchers. Dia Walker at the University of Utah's got some as well. And they're all measures that would be completely wrong for a parent of a 14-year-old or 13. Great question. Yes?
I'm interested in parenting, and recently I was thinking about something about parents' expectation on their child's
Expectations, yes.
Yeah, and I know something about tiger parenting.
Yes.
I think they have pretty high expectation on their child. So how about overparenting and overparenting?
Here's the difference between tiger parenting and helicopter parenting. The tiger parent, as you said, has high expectations for the child's achievement. The helicopter parent, in some ways, is the exact opposite. It's that you don't have to do all those things. Let me do them for you. That's the difference. In the one case, you need to go out and do all those things and do them well, I might add. In the other case, it's let me help you do those things. I'm not going to expect you to do them yourself. And that's the huge difference between tiger parenting and helicopter parenting. Helicopter parenting being a much more American, Caucasian phenomenon, tiger parenting being much more of an Asian phenomenon. As that's the title comes from, actually. Yeah. So there's a big difference. They look similar on the surface, but there's a big difference. Yeah, and you've hit the nail on the head. It's expectations. That's the difference. Okay. guess what? The people who are exposed to helicopter parenting or overparenting have more avoided coping strategies. That probably doesn't come as a surprise. We found an indirect effect for perceived stress and greater anxiety through more coping. So the people who are exposed to overparenting actually report they're more stressed out. How can that be? Mom is doing my laundry, mom's doing my dishes, she's putting money in my account, but they're more stressed out. There again, there's that paradoxical effect of overparenting, more anxiety as well. In this study, we had 477 dyads. I'll just go through these quickly, and I'll get to some new findings. Children reported more problems with the parents. Here's some of the problem items you were asking. I wish I wasn't so dependent on my parents, or I'm different from my friends, so even their own sense of self they weren't satisfied with. More critical family environment. I have to be careful what I do, or my family will put me down. All is not well in these family systems. This was our first glimpse that in the environment of overparenting, you don't always have these best of intentions. We want the best. I've scoured the literature looking for variables that seem to be beneficial with overparenting. I can't find it. If you can, please email me. I'm searching for them. Here's what I have found, and I won't go through them all, but these are from different labs in the United States, including one of our own, and what I find over and over again are findings indicating that helicopter parenting or overparenting have deleterious effects on child outcomes. Now, let's shift gears for 1 second for the last part of this and talk a little bit about the parents. The legacy of parenting styles research. I hope you all recognize Diana Baumrind up there and her parenting styles, which have now become part of our general vocabulary of family science. The authoritarian parent, right? The authoritative parent. Permissive or laissez-faire parent. And the neglecting or uninvolved parent. Which is the best parenting style, by the way, before we move on? Just big homage to Baumrind. Yes, of course, the authoritative Democrat. Now, very much influenced by her, myself as a student. One of the legacies of this research, I think, though, was a focus on child outcomes. Baumrind herself spent much of her career actually studying children more than she studied parents. She studied parents, but she was really interested in child outcomes. Probably as she ought to have been. You know, I mean, that's, you got a 30-year-old and a 3-year-old, you're more concerned about the life of the 3-year-old and what it's going to become. The 30-year-old is who he or she is. So for many, many years, we put a lot of focus on parenting styles. Research was focused more on child outcomes. The motivations and the qualities of the parents became sort of a secondary interest. For me, this is becoming more of a primary interest. Now that I get the sense that the children of helicopter parents have these various troubles, they've been replicated in several studies, I'm shifting my attention, well, who does this in the first place? I can't help but notice a lot of your questions are about that. Is it an ethnic issue? Is it an age of the child? You want to know, is it socioeconomic status? A lot of your questions are about are, who does this? Who are the overparents? I want to talk about that momentarily here. So in this case, we looked at some parental traits. We had 653 parents, and we found, sure enough, anxiety, which is one thing that Nelson found in her work, higher anxious parents. That predicts parental reports of overparenting. And here comes the effect for regret. And let me give you a brief synopsis of the lost opportunity theory of regret. Social psychologists have argued that when we have significant goals in life, and we see the opportunity to achieve those goals disappearing, that window of opportunity disappears, and we don't think we can ever make right on those goals, we start to experience regret. That's the genesis of regret. It's feeling that I wanted to fill in the blank, and the window of opportunity for fill in the blank is now pretty much closed then. And now I feel regret. What happens when people feel regret? Our theory is that's when they start shifting their focus to the child and try to live vicariously through the child. So in this case, regret seems to generate anxiety, which then predicts overparenting. The idea being, I'm worried that my child will never become, the doctor, the lawyer that I wanted to become, and now I know I won't be able to do that. So now I have to really push hard to get my child to do that. That's in a nutshell the lost opportunity theory of regret. Here we also looked at parent-child traits and qualities. We found parenting, overparenting associated with a critical family environment. So these parents aren't actually the nicest people in the world, they're actually somewhat critical. It got us thinking, could it be that they're overparenting because they don't think their kids have what it takes to make it on their own? Hey, you two ASU students, you're not going to pass your class unless I remind you of your exam and tell you to study and tell you not to hang out with your friends too much. Maybe they're not necessarily enacting this with the best of intentions. They have not ill intentions, but they have a negative view of the child. So here are some questions that go on the critical family environment scale. I have to be careful what I do. My family will put me down. I get a poor grade at school. My parent stops giving me attention for a while. My child's parents saying my child's behavior embarrasses me. Endorsing those statements predicted overparenting. And higher expressed emotion, the criticism subscale was predicted by that, as well as negative attitudes toward the child. This study for me was an eye-opener, because now I watch myself and I say, helicopter parenting is often enacted with the best of intentions. My own data now are causing me to question that. There's actually a lot of negativity in some of these families, and perhaps a view of the child is not fully competent. Therefore, you need me to step in and guide you and to run your life for you. And that's a very different view than, I just want the best for you, which is the way we kind of started out thinking about this. I'll just tell you real quick, we're in the middle of doing a longitudinal study right now, which I believe is the first one on overparenting. We've got about 250 dyads in this study. We're in the second wave of a one-year, two-wave panel design. So far, we found overparenting to be associated with inconsistent discipline, which is another less than ideal parenting tactic. The more they report overparenting, the more their discipline tends to run hot and cold. Also not good for child outcomes. And we also found child anxiety so far, just poking around in the data, replicating that effect. Again, I wish I could find, I'm going to this as a news reporter, I'm not the news maker, but all the news I have to report about this is largely negative. The children seem to have negative traits. The parents don't seem to have the best view of the children. They don't seem to be constructing the most healthy, optimal family environment. And there may be something at the root of this in the psychology of the parent, in terms of what they're looking for in their life that they never found, that's now getting commingled into the child's. Yes?
So you talked about regret in terms of the parents regretting about their own lives.
Yes.
But is it also regretting maybe how they parented earlier on and they feel like they weren't around enough and are overcompensating?
Good question. The regret scale actually has many subdimensions in different domains in life, and one of them actually is parenting. There's parenting, there's job. You know another big one? Romance. Even married people have regrets about like past romances. I think there's a financial one, there's like a leisure subscale. So we treat it as a latent variable, but one of the indicators of it was a parenting variable. And it could be that part of the regret is exactly what you said. I wished early on I had done more for X, Y, and Z child.
And that's maybe why my child's having problems now, and so now I have to...
It could be that they're trying to compensate for something that they thought they didn't do as well earlier on. That's very plausible, very, very plausible. I wouldn't say it's the only reason for it, but there's probably a subset of helicopter parents who are doing just that. Good question. Other questions? Yes?
Is it common that these parents are using strategies to, in a way, manipulate their kid to remind them that, hey, I'm paying for your college, I'm paying for grocery money or gas money, in case the kid tries to, the child tries to resist against that overparenting?
Yeah. I don't have data on that, but what I have seen anecdotally in 14 years of being a department head, which is a lot of anecdotal evidence, is exactly what you described. What I call is parental entitlement, underwritten by the chink-a-chink factor. I'm paying for your education, I'm paying for your housing, I bought you that BMW, therefore I am entitled to tell you what to do. And with financial investment often comes a sense of entitlement. I own my house, I should be able to paint my house whatever color I want. Until the homeowners association comes along, and we get mad at it because it violates our sense of entitlement because we have financially underwritten the purchase of that product. I would have to imagine you would see that if you would actually dig deep into the psychology of older parents, that there's definitely a feeling that I am entitled. It is reasonable for me to have a heavy-handed approach to guiding my child, again, because I have so much invested in the child, certainly.
That creates like unequal power dynamics, right? When you become hold over your kid.
Definitely, definitely. And that might be one of the reasons why the kids are reporting that they're not thrilled with their family environment. They're in a coercive relationship in some ways with their parents, where the parent is heavy-handedly guiding them through life in a way that the child may not be that happy with. And the parent thinks that they're totally justified in doing it. Yes?
Have you looked at all at their academic achievement in college as it relates to overparenting?
I haven't, but somebody else has. I think it was Padilla Walker at University of Utah, and showed lower academic achievement, more prescription medications. I mean, but yeah, academic achievements are not bolstered by helicopter parenting. So again, the parents who think like this one, I'll remind you of your quiz and your exam and all. If anything, it has a neutral effect, and in many cases, a negative. Yes, sir.
In that last model, I noticed that the parent report, relation to parent report and critical family environment is a lot lower than the child report.
Yes, that's bad.
So, I'm curious, is that getting at that maybe parents aren't even aware that there is this environment that they're creating that's causing all these negative outcomes?
Good question. Let me give you a statistical answer, first of all. So you're looking at this effect versus that effect, is that it?
Or the two red lines.
Oh, the two red lines, yeah. So this effect versus this effect. What you said is entirely plausible, but we should first take note of the fact that, wait a second. Actually, no, these are coming from different, okay, so, yeah, so your hypothesis is that the parent is less aware of the critical environment, right? I would agree with that. In all my research I've done outside of this realm, when I would measure family environment variables, the child, especially if they're an adolescent or a young adult, almost always reports a more negative view. We actually feel that the parents have a sort of ego-defensive motivation for not telling it like it is, right? If you're 17, you go, hey, my family's kind of screwed up. I mean, your friends at school, like, yeah, so is mine. It's almost like a badge of honor. But if you're the parent and you're the architect of that family environment, that's not too cool to kind of admit to yourself. So I do think there's an ego-defensive bias here where even if the environment is a little bit messed up, the parent might be a little bit more motivated than the child to say, it's not that bad after all. You see this a lot in like in the eating disorders literature. When you ask the girls with eating disorders what their parents are like, and you ask the parents what they're like, you get completely different stories. We generally think that the girls are actually the ones who are spot on. And the fact that they and mom can't agree on the family environment, like that's part of the problem right there. So I mean, yeah, that's an excellent observation. This is particularly astonishing because here you have the effect of common method variance, parent-parent. Here you actually have child-to-parent. It's the stronger of the two coefficients. It's a great observation. Other questions? Yes?
So my kids play sports, Little League and soccer, and there's a lot of talk within the sports leagues about having positive parents on the sidelines, and even last weekend we had silent sidelines where we didn't say anything at all. And so I'm curious about whether, is this anecdotal? Is there research behind it? Because it seems like there's concern about this idea of perhaps over-parenting of youth in sports programs.
Right. Here's what I've read about youth and sports programs and some of the problems of parents that go into it. You have to call the police and they get arrested. They're a little bit off the highway of over-parenting and onto what I would call a corrupted social learning effect. That is, when dad goes to the you jerk, that was a ball, or that was a strike. What they're doing is they're teaching their kids to disrespect the umpire, to question the umpire. Or, hey, ref, that was a foul. What the hell? Why didn't you see that? In soccer, you don't challenge the ref. The ref is the god of that field, and you don't challenge the ref unless you got that captain armband on, and then you politely ask them, are you sure that was a foul? Something like that. But what the problem is that the parents model maladaptive behaviors to the kids, and so the leagues are trying to get a handle on the parents, not so much because they're over-parenting them or over-guiding them, but they're showing them a maladaptive way of playing the game, responding to the game, sportsmanship, that kind of thing. And so I think that's where there's some movement to try to get parents to settle down. I read about I think it was a Little League in like Sausalito or something like that, where parents had to sign a contract at the beginning of the season about their what's appropriate behavior. because they're having so much trouble with them yelling at the ums and stamping their feet and stuff like that. And the idea is, we're here to teach these young people some sense of sportsmanship, you know, and that means losing sometimes. And it even means sometimes getting a bad call. You work with it and you move on. But when the parents get too crazy about it, that actually teaches the kids the wrong way themselves. And of course, they're very willing and able to model their parents. I mean, when dad starts shouting, that teaches me as a youngster, well, if dad shouts, then I should be doing, not only can I should be doing the exact same thing. And that's bad for the entire endeavor. I mean, there's some of that in there. I mean, there's no doubt when you were sitting in the bleachers, that dad probably wishes he was on the Diamondbacks. I go to my regret theory again. I'm like, no, I'm not. So if my kid can win the Pima County League, then it's kind of get my baseball thing satisfied a little bit. I mean, yeah, there's an element of that in there. Absolutely. Yes?
So I'm still stuck on the development piece. So I'm an adolescent researcher.
Okay.
I don't study autonomy, but
sure.
It's critical. And I'm also very interested in prevention and intervention. As a parent of a very young child, where I interact with other parents of young children, I just don't believe that this is an adolescent phenomenon, and I wonder if there's actually an accumulation effect.
You think it happens younger on?
Oh yeah.
Oh sure.
So autonomy is central to
right.
Erickson's theory of toddlerhood, right? That we have
right.
autonomy beginning in that time period, and so just at my son's school, I have noticed that other parents will like color in and shape their children's artwork to be perfect. Right?
Yeah.
He's 3, and these these other parents are like coloring the lines and making their kids' artwork perfect, and that seems to be like developmentally inappropriate, right? Another strategy of over parenting so that their child has like the blue star first place artwork when it's like just scribbles, right?
Right.
So is it an accumulation effect potentially that and that it starts in very early childhood?
Oh yeah, I would never argue that overparenting kicks in exclusively in adolescence or young adulthood. I think its most deleterious effects are probably at that point in the lifespan. Well, the problem, I mean, your argument is an interesting one, but the problem is it's confounded hopelessly with a dosage effect, right? You're talking about someone who's going to ultimately get 20 years of overparenting, and if it did kick in when you're 16, I'm talking about someone who got 5 years. So of course your child is going to have way bigger problems. You'd have to do a very careful, sort of long-term longitudinal study to unpack that. But I fully agree. You can see examples of overparenting with 6-year-olds, with 5-year-olds. There's no doubt that this can happen earlier on in lifespan. I'm probably biased by my theory of overparenting, which is very much driven by parental motivation. And I don't see parents projecting, gosh, I wish I was a lawyer, onto my 4-year-old. They're just not, I mean, I can't do anything with that motivation of a 4-year-old. When they get to be 14, hey, that American government class might be really cool. You should join the debate team. Get on to forensic. Now I can start working with them. That's why I don't think the parental motivations have the opportunity to engage to this. But the risk aversion, I want to wrap my 4-year-old in bubble wrap, and I got kids in my neighborhood who ride like motor scooters, and they got no helmet on, no nothing. They got other kids on like bikes with training wheels. They got elbow pads, your shin guards, a face mask, like a goalie wears at soccer. You're like, okay, I can see who the helicopter parents. These are all young kids, so it can happen. But if you believe in it, you don't have to believe in the parental motivation kind of approach to this about projecting parental ideals onto the child. It would be, other than the cases of sports, I really do think if you wished you were a FIFA World Cup athlete, you could get your 4-year-old going on that. Or the beauty contest that we see on TV where these girls are extremely young. I don't even think they can fully grasp the whole contest idea yet. And yet they're put on stage with makeup and hair. So yeah, there's examples of it going on with younger than young adults, sure. Yes?
So something I think about in early childhood, and I wonder if you think this fits in overparenting with some other parenting systems, is there's a lot of parental attribution of negative characteristics. So for example, like this is just a total anecdote that I worked with a parent who, her child was very aggressive, and she attributed all of that to the child's father, who she did not have a positive relationship with. I was like, ugh, he's just like him, and she was desperate to squash the aggression because it reminded her of him. So instead of like promoting and putting hopes and dreams, but really sort of trying to guide the child in a different way so it pushes back the things that you don't like from your adult life,
yeah. That's called a de-identification effect, right? Where you're trying to, you identify some figure that the child is cemented with, you're essentially trying to pull them apart. I mean, I think that would be a variant of this. It's being done for perhaps a slightly different motivation, which is not so much I want to achieve my dream, but I want to separate you with that which I think is evil. You know, and it might be an idiosyncratic vision of evil. But it would have, I think, some of the same dynamics as overparenting in terms of the advice and risk aversion, things like that, but probably more circumscribed to the object of identification that you're trying to pull the child away from. Whereas the overparenting here is probably a more of a global phenomenon about success in life and so forth. But yeah, I absolutely think that could happen. Yes?
So are overparenting and helicopter parenting the same thing?
Well, yeah, I think helicopter parenting is the media term or the colloquial term, and I use the Munich term of overparenting. I do believe they're fairly synonymous with each other. We use the term overparenting because that's what's actually appeared in the psychological literature, and I'm not coining that term. I'm using someone else's. Helicopter parenting, I think, is the media version of this.
I ask it because developmentally, to me, helicopter parenting implies that your child is past the point where they're physically under your purview, and you're trying to find a way to continue to have control over them when they're in that independent environment.
Right.
And to me, it goes along with the child who's left the nest.
Right.
And so how do I continue to sit on the egg or whatever while they're out of the nest?
It's an interesting observation.
It's a term, but I'm wondering.
Yeah. Well, you're getting at like the Nelson idea of intimacy plus surveillance. Let me try to give you a way of that I would endorse of thinking about a parent-child relationship as being on a continuum. I mean, we often think about you live with your parents because it's a dichotomous variable, or you don't. But let's think about a continuum where when you're raising your infant child, I bet is never out of your field of vision, right? Ever. Probably when you're sleeping, right? Or maybe when you go to work and someone else is watching it, something like that, right? I mean, for the most part. And that's completely adaptive, completely functional. You certainly wouldn't do that with your 16-year-old. When I was 16, I would go for like days without seeing my mom sometimes. You know, I'd come home late, go to bed, get up early, go to school. And at that age, that's appropriate, that's acceptable. So what happens is how intensive or intrusive is the surveillance? Is it, you have to carry a separate cell phone just for me, so when it calls, you have to answer it? I'm going to put a GPS thing in your car, or I'm going to give you a cell phone and track the GPS. Some parents will do that. The child's still living under the roof. The parent has intensive supervision. Sometimes when the child leaves, they're still doing that. So to me, I don't put as much stock in the are you living under your parent's roof or not as a dichotomous variable, but it's in your relationship with your parent, how much of that hovering is going on. I think it can go on while they're living at home to a great extent, or not to a great extent, or while they're not. To give you a quick example. I work for the Pima County Attorney's Office. I run a diversion program for youth offenders. So I see all kinds of youth in trouble, and the family systems I see are usually destroyed, or they're so loose in terms of cohesion. I'll often see young people who will say, one question I ask every single one of them as a family scientist, how often do you eat dinner with your parents in a week? You know, probably the modal answer is 0 or 1. And I'll say to them, okay then, who's making your dinner on the days you're not eating with your parent? And usually they'll say things like, I don't know. And I'll look at them, I'm incredulous. I mean, what did you do tonight? Did you eat dinner? I mean, you don't know? Well, I'll throw something in the microwave, or sometimes I don't eat any. And I see these really low cohesion family systems. Now, we can contrast them with these ones where they're giving the kid the cell phone, they got the GPS. In both cases, the child's living under the parental roof, but the one who's not eating dinner but one time a week with their parent, they may as well be living in the college dorm. And those experiences for me have taught me that hovering over, it's something that can transcend whether you're physically residing with your parent. As we saw in the video, it can certainly be done when you're not living with your parent. But just because you're living with your parent doesn't mean that they have surveillance or contact. A lot of these parents, I'll ask them, like, do you know what your kids' friends are? Do you know where they are in the night? No idea. I had a girl last week, she ran away for 4 days. 14 years old. Said to her mom, you know where she was for 14 days? No. Call the police? No. Really? You just let her cruise the street? I can't control her. That was what she said to me. No, I'm not judging her. I mean, maybe this girl's worn her mom down to nothing. But she's technically living at home, her mom. But is she really? So I see it as really a continuum of possibility. And there is a demarcation when they leave home, of course. And I think that's what's got the media's attention. It parents were not even living with their kids and they're hovering over them. That's we saw the video. Good observation, though. I think that's probably one of the reasons we're biased to think about overparenting is something that happens with young adults because it's after they leave home that it's most astonishing to think a parent comes over and does their dishes for them and does their laundry. And I'm not judging parents who do that. I mean, I think it's, for young people, it's a wonderful thing. But the question is it preventing them from developing coping skills? Is it preventing them from developing a tolerance for frustration? And that's the concern about it. Other questions, comments, things you have on your mind? Yes, ma'am.
Gender different, like students. It is more prevalent for male students versus female.
Good question. Now our samples are pretty evenly split. We haven't done a great deal of analysis of that. And someone else made a comment earlier, because it's probably confounding, because I remember I was saying to you, I probably had 80% mothers in these samples, 75 to 80%. And so it really raised a question like making a matrix of parent sex by child sex, and where is this most prevalent? Good question. You're probably thinking, let me see if I can guess, that, for example, in the cleaning and the dishes, I wouldn't be as likely to do that for a female, right? Because it's a stereotypical male thing that you clean your apartment and do your laundry. Right? Makes sense, yeah, I would agree. That's a really good question. So that would be what we call the tangible assistance dimension of overparenting. That it might be that it's being provided more to males than females. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. Honestly, I've never, it'd be a simple t-test, but I've never actually run it. But it would make total sense to me. Yes?
So even that question, because I bet it's males too, I'm thinking about when these young adults partner and they're in romantic relationships and they have not done any dishes. Oh my gosh, can you even imagine the conflicts of interest? It's like the dishes just sit there and it's like, oh, do you expect me or your mom to show up? Like, who is going to do that? And then something like if both of them come from parents, family backgrounds in which both of them are, so no one does dishes unless you can financially afford. Who's going to do the dishes? Like the roaches are going to take over.
So true, so true. If you want to have a happy, successful marriage, you have got to understand the family system that your would-be partner came from. You have to.
Unless your mom moves in, unless one or both.
Well, yeah, that would drive you crazy anyway. You're right, but you have to. I mean, if you have to hire a private eye to go out and find out about that family system, do it. Because exactly what you're talking about. What do these people become as partners?
And then as parents, like if they choose to be parents or they end up as parents with an unplanned pregnancy, which probably is going to occur because like parents might have regular birth control for them.
Yeah, really.
So what are they going to do as parents then? Like they're going to have grandparents?
It's frightening. It's frightening. Yes.
So we're just about to wrap up, and I know people need to go. But my last question for you is, so it seems very clear that overparenting is not helping young adults. Then how are we getting that information out to parents? And what's the best way to get it out? Because I think, sure, there's some that have good intentions, right?
Right.
To work with.
Certainly. First of all, let's not be critical of the information machine for not getting it out. As I said before, and I really have to stress this, this research is in its infancy. Look at the dates on all these studies. Some of them are this year. Public consumption of knowledge and the diffusion of scientific knowledge can often take, look at attachment theory. It took decades before people really wrapped their arms around it. Hopefully it'll take sooner here. One thing that I've heard of that's going on at some college campuses, which I really like, this is where the rubber hits the road, is where the parents come to campus with their young freshman students, and they separate them. And they have an orientation for the students, and they have an orientation for the parents. U of A actually does this. They don't have any of this in it. But this is a great point of intervention, if you ask me. It's working with college students, but you have a nice captive audience. You have parents of college freshmen. And I think when you're sitting them down, what U of A does now is they tell them, well, here's how registration works, and here's the registrar's office, and here's the gyms and residence life. It wouldn't be a bad idea to give a little 20-minute thing on, titrating, to use a chemistry term, your level of parenting to be appropriate for your child's needs. And how, even though you may have the best of intention, sometimes it's best just to let them. Quick anecdote. I built furniture in my free time, which is non-existent anymore, and I had some doors being installed in my house. And there was a young carpenter and there was an old guy with him who was the owner of the company. And the young carpenter was struggling to get the doors squared up and get plumbed. And I could see exactly what was wrong. And I went up to him and I said, tell you what, you know, I'm in the business. Let's go out to my garage. I'll run this thing through my planer. We'll fix it up. We'll get this. And the old guy stopped and took me outside and said, let him struggle with it. Like, really? It's like, that's how he's going to learn. Like, that guy's a genius. So he knew, he said, I can see what's wrong. You can see what's wrong. He can't. And he'll find a way. Let him do it. He said, I know it's your house and you want it to be right. He said, I'll make sure it's done right. Let him struggle with it. That phrase, let him struggle with it, is a phrase that we need to let parents hear when they're taking their 18-year-olds off to college. That's how they'll develop their coping skills. That's how they'll build their self-efficacy. And that's ultimately what's going to keep their anxiety level up. Anything else? Okay, thanks a lot. You're a fantastic audience. It's fun talking to you.